2027, leaving the Holy Sword Temple. Yuan followed the sixth elder to the same golden carriage that had brought him to the Holy Sword Temple years ago. Once inside, the flying treasure immediately began to move, but it moved at a much quicker pace than before.
We will arrive directly at the gates of heaven in 1 month, so we have plenty of time to talk.
Yuan had hoped to visit the super-perfect physique-tempering sect first, but time was short. Besides, he was fairly certain they would already be at the gates of heaven since he had mentioned his intention to enter the Sword Emperor qualifications. After all,
You want me to join the Holy Sword clan, right? While it wasn't direct, I have already been recruited by the Holy Sword Maiden. In that case, what do you think?
most people would leap at the opportunity to join the Holy Sword clan, so this was the first time the sixth elder had encountered someone who didn't. Yet she wasn't offended. In fact, with talent like his, she felt he had every right to be picky.
I said that I'd need some time to see whether the Holy Sword clan was a place I wanted to be associated with. After all, I don't want to join a place I know nothing about. What if I accidentally join a faction with a bad reputation? I don't want that to happen. Then you have nothing to worry about. Our Holy Sword clan is not only reputable, but we're also very respected. Besides the recent incident with the Holy Sword Temple, we don't have any issues.
Hearing this, Yuan felt a little guilty. The Holy Sword Temple only acted it did because of him, but the Holy Sword Temple took the blame.
About the Holy Sword Temple. I think everything is functional again. I was able to train inside without any issues, after all.
Said Yuan. The sixth elder nodded and said,
I'm glad nothing happened to you, but we can't assume it's safe to enter again. We'll need to conduct a thorough analysis.
Yuan wanted to tell her it wasn't necessary, but chose to remain silent, as explaining everything would be too troublesome, and she likely wouldn't believe him anyway. Since there was nothing actually wrong with the Holy Sword Temple, they'd find nothing unusual. Most likely, they'd just waste time investigating, only to resume using it in the near future.
Anyway, I'll consider joining the Holy Sword clan, so you don't need to try to convince me.
He then said,
If you say so.
Not wanting to annoy him, the sixth elder stopped mentioning it and closed her eyes to cultivate. Yuan spent the following month by the window, gazing into the distance each day in hopes of seeing the Eater of Stars again, but alas, she never appeared. A month later, they arrived at the gates of heaven in the seventh heaven. Since most cultivators from the eighth and ninth heavens possessed treasures that allowed them to spectate from afar and had the resources to travel downward, hosting the Sword Emperor qualifications in the seventh heaven ensured the greatest possible audience. The gates of heaven's territory spanned thousands of miles, making it one of the most prominent sects in the seventh heaven, with a disciple count exceeding 100,000. Much of its popularity stemmed from its vast and unparalleled collection of cultivation techniques, and unlike many others, the sect was generous in sharing them with its disciples. The sect's leader, Bai Ling, was among the most respected cultivators in the nine heavens, hailed as a hero by many and regarded as a role model throughout the cultivation world. His contributions to the nine heavens were nearly unparalleled. Beyond making techniques affordable through the myriad of techniques, Bai Ling was renowned for aiding anyone in need, regardless of their status or background. Despite holding only the rank of overlord within the celestial overlords, Bai Ling's contributions were unmatched, even surpassing those of the celestial overlords themselves. Of course, if he wished, he could easily claim the title, having been offered the position multiple times. Yet, for reasons unknown, he had declined each offer and remained as Su Jiechi's closest aide. Thanks to Bai Ling's esteemed reputation, news that the next Sword Emperor qualifications would be held at the gates of heaven quickly drew the attention of countless prominent figures across the nine heavens, many of whom chose to attend in person. Naturally, as a once-in-100,000-year event, the Sword Emperor qualifications already commanded immense attention, drawing an endless sea of spectators from across the world. Even before reaching the gates of heaven, Yuan could see thousands of cultivators converging from all directions, almost as if there was a massive banquet.
We're here.
The sixth elder said as she walked to the door.
Give me a moment.
Yuan retrieved his mask and wore it. The sixth elder raised her eyebrows after seeing this, and she couldn't help but ask,
What's with the mask? There are too many people here, and I don't like having too much attention.
He calmly responded. The sixth elder remained silent, her gaze fixed on Yuan, his appearance strikingly reminiscent of the faceless Sword Emperor. Unbeknownst to Yuan, all who trained in the Holy Sword Temple had to face Tian Xin in battle, so they were very familiar with his appearance.
Did you sign up for the event yet?
She suddenly asked.
No, I haven't. Is it too late? No, you can still sign up now. Most people sign up a few days before the qualifications begin, anyway. Come with me. I'll take you there.
Yuan nodded. After stepping out of the golden carriage, Yuan followed the sixth elder to the sect's entrance, where hundreds of people were streaming in through the gates. While the crowd made their way to the spectators' area, The sixth elder led Yuan to the inner court of the sect, a far quieter place, as guests were only permitted to roam the outer court. 2028, you better remember my name. When they arrived at their destination, Yuan noticed a few familiar faces, all standing before a fist-sized red crystal that floated on a circular platform. The first familiar face was Li Bowen from the Holy Sword clan, and then there was the potty-mouthed Sword Empress. The other familiar faces were obviously the Holy Sword Maiden and the Holy Sword King. Right as their arrival, Yuan could see a handsome man standing before the red crystal with a sword in his grasp and his body gushing with supreme sword aura.
You may begin,
said a middle-aged man clad in the Gates of Heaven's sect elder uniform. Then, the handsome man swung his sword at the floating red crystal, striking it with his supreme sword aura. However, the red crystal remained undamaged, emitting a faint red glow the next moment.
I'm sorry, but your supreme sword aura is not strong enough to participate,
said the sect elder.
Damn it.
The handsome man clenched his teeth in anger and frustration.
Ha ha ha.
The Holy Sword King suddenly laughed as he stepped forward.
Let me show you how it's done.
He retrieved his sword and immediately surged with supreme sword aura that was noticeably much stronger than the man's. Once the sect elder nodded, the Holy Sword King swung at the red crystal, causing it to emit a bright crimson light.
Holy Sword King of the Holy Sword clan, qualified,
said the sect elder. The man sucked his teeth in annoyance at the Holy Sword King, but didn't say anything since the Holy Sword King was clearly stronger than him. After the Holy Sword King, the Holy Sword Maiden stepped forward and repeated the same thing, striking the red crystal with her supreme sword aura. The red crystal radiated a brilliant crimson light, comparable to that of the Holy Sword King, and perhaps even subtly stronger.
Holy Sword Maiden of the Holy Sword clan, qualified. Senior Huang, what do you think? Do you think we can become Sword Emperors?
The Holy Sword King asked the Sword Empress. She snorted and said,
Just because you qualify to participate doesn't mean you'll qualify as a Sword Emperor. However, judging by your results, I think you'll have a good chance of.
The Sword Empress abruptly cut herself off when two figures caught her eye from the corner of her vision. Normally, such a sight wouldn't warrant her attention, but one was the sixth elder, and the other wore a mask. Ignoring the sixth elder, the Sword Empress focused her attention on Yuan, her eyes wide with disbelief.
Faceless Sword Emperor?
She muttered in a daze.
What?
The others followed her gaze. Since everyone who trained inside the Holy Sword Temple had fought the Faceless Sword Emperor, they were all familiar with his appearance.
No way.
The Holy Sword Maiden and the others were just as stunned as the Sword Empress. After all, Yuan didn't just resemble the Faceless Sword Emperor in stature. He was, in almost every way, his mirror image. Yuan stepped up and asked the sect elder,
I just need to hit this crystal with my supreme sword aura, right? Yes, but you're...
The sect elder looked at Yuan with raised eyebrows because of his low cultivation. However, Yuan ignored him. Without even drawing a sword, he simply extended a finger toward the crystal before channeling a vast amount of supreme sword aura, all concentrated at his fingertip. The Holy Sword Maiden and the Holy Sword King immediately frowned as they sensed his supreme sword aura, as it was far superior to their own. A moment later, Yuan unleashed his supreme sword aura, directing it straight at the red crystal. The crystal flared with a brilliant crimson light for a brief second, then abruptly dimmed as cracks began to spread across its surface. The sect elder exclaimed in a shocked and nervous voice when he saw the cracks. The red crystal was renowned as the strongest and most durable material in the nine heavens when it came to withstanding sword auras, and only sword emperors would be able to damage it. Yet, Yuan had cracked it with such ease.
Sorry, I didn't think it would be so fragile. Wait a second, that voice and cultivation.
The Sword Empress suddenly realized something and approached Yuan. However, as she stood before him, she began doubting herself.
No, it can't be you.
She muttered. She thought he was Yuan, but he'd entered the Holy Sword Temple a few years ago. There was simply no way he could have learned supreme sword aura and honed it to such a terrifying degree in such a short amount of time.
It is him.
The sixth elder suddenly spoke. The Sword Empress turned to look at her with wide eyes.
He came out of the Holy Sword Temple a month ago, and we came straight here because he wanted to participate in the Sword Emperor qualifications.
She continued. After hearing this, the Sword Empress turned to look at Yuan again. Then, she spoke in a somewhat trembling voice.
I had expected you to be a true reincarnator when I saw your talents at the Holy Sword Temple, and you've just confirmed it. If I had to gamble, I'd bet my entire fortune that you were the Faceless Sword Emperor in your past life. Him? A true reincarnator?
The others exclaimed, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Yuan smiled behind his mask and said,
You're giving me too much credit. I'm flattered. Humph.
A cold snort suddenly resounded. and the Holy Sword King stepped forward.
Even if you're the Faceless Sword Emperor's reincarnation, I won't lose to you. The Sword Emperor qualifications are much more than just the strength of our supreme sword aura.
After staring at him for a second, Yuan pretended not to know him and said,
Sorry, but who are you?
The Holy Sword King trembled in anger before responding in a loud voice.
I am the Holy Sword King, Zhang Wubing, the man who will defeat you. You better remember my name.
2029, a month delay.
You'll defeat me? I'll look forward to it.
Yuan calmly responded to the Holy Sword King's aggression. The Sword Empress merely shook her head in silence. Although she wanted to smack some sense into the Holy Sword King's head, there was also no guarantee that Yuan would win the Sword Emperor qualifications just because his supreme sword aura was stronger. The qualifications tested more than just the strength of one's supreme sword aura. It also evaluated the swordmaster's skill, versatility, and overall mastery of their swordsmanship. After all, becoming a Sword Emperor demanded more than raw power, and only the most refined and knowledgeable swordmasters could earn such a prestigious title. The Holy Sword Maiden silently watched the events unfold before her, her eyes staring at Yuan, feeling like she'd met him before, but she couldn't remember when. Of course, she had no idea that the man before her was Yuan, the person she'd given her sword badge to.
Take this.
The sect elder approached Yuan and handed him a medallion.
This proves you're qualified, and you'll need it during the Sword Emperor qualifications. Thank you. And about the crystal.
The sect elder turned to look at the cracked, red crystal and sighed.
We'll have to delay the Sword Emperor qualifications until we receive another one. Delay? How long will it be delayed?
The Sword Empress asked.
A month at most. Sorry.
Yuan apologized.
Anyway, I have someplace to be, so I'll talk to you guys later.
And without waiting for their response, he turned around and flew away.
Senior Huang, who was that man?
The Holy Sword Maiden turned to ask the Sword Empress shortly after.
HM? You don't know?
The Sword Empress looked at her with raised eyebrows.
Should I know him? Of course. Since you gave him your sword badge.
The Holy Sword Maiden's eyes widened with shock after hearing this, and she finally realized who the masked figure was.
That was him?
She exclaimed. The Holy Sword King didn't say anything, but he was looking at the Holy Sword Maiden with a slight frown on his face, as he couldn't remember the last time she seemed so engaged. Though the Holy Sword King never openly admitted it, those close to him had long suspected his affection for the Holy Sword Maiden. Since their parents were both Sword Emperors in the Holy Sword clan, the two had grown up together. Unfortunately, the Holy Sword Maiden did not seem to have the same affection for him, for from the moment of her birth, the only thing she had ever pursued was the way of the sword. Because of this, the Holy Sword King grew even more agitated and resentful, especially now that she was showing interest in some unknown figure she'd barely even met. Meanwhile, Yuan wandered through the gates of heaven until he came across a disciple he could approach for directions.
Excuse me, do you know where I can find Senior Bai, your sect leader? Sect leader Bai. He's not someone you can meet just because you want to.
The disciple said, eyeing Yuan from head to toe. To him, Yuan looked like just another mortal wasting his time. And before Yuan could say anything else, the disciple flew away. Yuan wasn't bothered by the encounter and immediately went to find someone else. Eventually, he found someone who was willing to help.
The sect leader is currently greeting guests, so he could be anywhere. But if you really want to meet him, you'll have a higher chance of meeting him at the venue. Which direction is the venue?
The disciple pointed in a specific direction, and Yuan followed it after thanking the disciple. Sometime later, Yuan arrived at the venue where the Sword Emperor qualifications would take place. The venue was nothing like Yuan had imagined. Hundreds of smaller islands floated around a massive central island. The smaller islands were packed with spectator seating, while the central island featured a vast platform surrounded by several imposing doors. Above it all, enormous projections hovered in the air, serving as viewing screens for the crowd. Though the event was still months away, tens of millions had already gathered, a testament to the event's significance and popularity. Upon his arrival, Yuan immediately used his divine sense to sweep the place to see if he could find Senior Bai or anyone that he recognized. Very quickly, he found Meishio and the others since they were all grouped together and sat in a private area reserved for Senior Bai's close friends. After finding them, Yuan immediately approached them.
Hey, everyone.
Yuan greeted them as he landed before them.
Yuan.
They immediately recognized him despite his mask.
You're back already?
Kellen, who was also there, muttered in a dumbfounded voice. He silently nodded.
Does that mean you've learned Supreme Sword Aura?
Legiancy asked.
There's no way you learned Supreme Sword Aura in under a decade.
Kellen exclaimed, his voice laced with disbelief. In response, Yuan calmly raised his hand and extended his middle finger, sheathed in a brilliant layer of Supreme Sword Aura. Li Jinsi and the others chuckled at his response. Kellen fell to his knees with his mouth wide open. Yuan patted his shoulder and said,
I'm looking forward to checking out your treasury.
Kellen sighed deeply.
Why did I ever agree to bet with you? I should have stood my ground and said no.
He stood up and continued.
Are you really going to participate in the Sword Emperor qualifications, though? Even though you've learned Supreme Sword Aura, you just learned it. I've already qualified to enter the event.
Said Yuan.
Unbelievable. Also, the Sword Emperor qualification will be delayed for a month.
He added.
Delay? Why? Because I broke the thing needed to verify during my verification.
He explained.
Why am I not surprised?
Kellen shook his head after a moment of silence.
At least this will give me some time to spend with you guys before the event begins.
Yuan chuckled. 2030 Sword Emperor qualifications.
I'll let Overlord Bai know that you're here.
Kellen said as he sent a message to Senior Bai through his communication jade slip. Meanwhile, Yuan began recalling his experience at the Holy Sword Clan and the Holy Sword Temple. The others didn't have much to talk about since they spent all of their time training.
Although we're spending all of our time training now, we'll be leaving the sect to train outside and gain real experience soon.
Said Wang Ming. Kellen nodded and said.
Don't worry, I'll make sure to have some experts accompany them. I'm not worried about them.
Yuan said with a smile, and he continued.
But I am worried about the trouble they might cause. You're one to talk.
Shilang immediately said.
Right? You're always getting into trouble, Yuan. At least that's what it seems like from the stories you tell us.
Said Wang Bingbing.
As much as I love you, I have to agree with the others.
Chu Yoxiang shook her head with a smile on her face. Mei Xiao quietly nodded her head. Seeing this, Yuan burst out laughing.
You're right, but it's not like I am purposefully looking for trouble. They just somehow come to me.
Sometime later, a familiar figure approached from a distance, descending gracefully and landing right in front of them.
This makes it our first time seeing each other outside of the myriad of techniques.
Senior Bai said to Yuan with a warm smile on his face. Yuan returned the smile and said.
Yes, it does. Thank you for always taking care of me. Since you're here, does that mean you've learned Supreme Sword Aura?
Senior Bai then asked. Kellen had only mentioned Yuan's arrival and nothing else, so Senior Bai could experience the same surprise he'd felt. Yuan nodded.
Yes, I have already qualified for the Sword Emperor qualifications.
He revealed the medallion he received from the sect elder. Senior Bai chuckled and said.
I heard. I also know that you broke the crystal, causing us to delay the event for a whole month. Sorry. It's fine.
Yuan then asked.
Is Sister Sue here?
Senior Bai shook his head.
No, she's too busy to come down to the seventh heaven, but she'll be watching it. I see. Anyway, I have to return to work now. Let's talk again later. If you need anything, just ask Kellen.
Said Senior Bai before flying away. Shortly after he left, Senior Bai made a quick announcement to the people there.
Due to some unexpected circumstances, we have to delay the Sword Emperor qualification for a month. We apologize for the delay and any inconvenience this may have caused and hope for your understanding.
Surprisingly, there were no complaints from the audience, or there were so few that it was unnoticeable.
The crowd is more calm than I had expected.
Wang Ming commented, as he'd anticipated some complaints.
The Sword Emperor qualifications can easily last several years, so everyone here is already prepared for a long stay. An extra month is nothing.
Kellen said.
Several years? What about our training?
Shimurong exclaimed in shock, as he'd only anticipated spending a few weeks or months at most at this event. Kellen shrugged and said.
You're free to leave at any time you want. The whole thing will be recorded anyway, so you won't miss anything but the experience.
A few years may seem like nothing to immortals, or those who have already lived thousands of years. However, for Shimurong and the others who have only lived for a few decades, a few years was a lot of time, and they were still at a point where their progress could be seen quickly.
You don't have to force yourself to stay here.
Yuan suddenly said.
Just stay as long as you want. I'm staying for the entire event.
Chu Yoxiang said firmly.
A few years mean nothing in the grand scheme of things, but missing such a pivotal moment in my partner's life? That's unthinkable. Me too.
Mei Xiao added.
But you don't have to force yourself to stay because we choose to stay. We all have different priorities, after all. I guess we'll see how things go.
Said Wu Zhao.
If it's entertaining enough, I'll stay. Otherwise, I'll just return to my training. Me too.
Said Hong Xiuquan.
You can't even take a small break? And you call me a training addict?
Li Jinsi shook her head. Wang Bing chuckled and said.
We're all training addicts.
In the end, everyone but Li Jinsi, Mei Xiao, and Chu Liuxiang decided to watch until they couldn't anymore. Time passed, and 2 weeks later, While Yuan was chatting with everyone, a figure descended onto their area. Kellen raised an eyebrow after seeing this individual, and he asked,
"What are you doing here, Sword Empress Huang? I don't have business with you."
she said before pointing to Yuan.
"Since we have some time, let's spar." "No."
Yuan immediately refused, which took her by surprise.
Why not? Why should I? The Sword Emperor qualification is about to begin, and you want me to waste my energy sparring with you? If you're trying to help those two, don't bother.
Yuan shook his head.
What? Are you talking about the Holy Sword Maiden and the Holy Sword King? I'm not asking for a spar because I want to help those two. I just want to experience your supreme sword aura myself.
She defended herself. However, Yuan refused again.
If you want to spar, we can do it after I become a Sword Emperor.
Sword Empress Huang's eyes widened.
You speak as if you've already won. Do you really think the Sword Emperor qualification is that easy? I hope not, or it wouldn't be fun. Fun? You think this is a game?
Sword Empress Huang frowned, clearly offended by his words. For the rare, few sword masters granted the chance to participate, the Sword Emperor qualifications represented the pinnacle of their lives, an opportunity to carve their names into history. Yet Yuan spoke of it, as if it were nothing more than a casual pastime. Any sword master would have taken offense, as this was a sacred trial, not something to be taken lightly or treated as entertainment. 2031 9 Heavens Ranking.
I apologize if my words offended you, but I can assure you that I don't think of the Sword Emperor qualification as a game.
Said Yuan.
Humph.
The Sword Empress snorted.
Whatever,